bit of bedlam, I think, if we tried to do too much of that. So if at some point we will have opportunity for questions. So if you do want to ask a question, obviously you need to unmute yourself. Let's open in prayer, and then I do have a few quick announcements to make. So dear Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us all in this wonderful way, and bless this time we spend together. Help us to really open our minds and ears to hear and learn. And we do lift up all the families that have been affected by COVID and in so many ways, and ask you to be with them. Ask your help for us to find a way to reach out and strengthen them as well. Both the families have been directly affected, as well as those that are worrying about jobs and so many things. Help us all get through this difficult time. Mostly help us find a way to connect with each other and with you, so we continue to do your work. And we just ask you to bless this hour that we spend together right now, trying to look at some of the ancient wisdom and apply it to our world today. In Christ's name, amen. So I'm just delighted to see so many of you here. We didn't know what to expect, but it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and a few unfamiliar faces. I want to introduce our speaker, but first let me just thank the committee that helped put this together. Marnie Keller and Rich Schwartz and Mickey McDonald, Alexander Mead have all put a lot of time into setting up a bunch of sessions for the rest of the year and into next year. And also thank you, a bunch of you that sent in ideas, because we need ideas. So thank you. And if anyone has ideas for future sessions, send one of us an email. Thanks also to Sarah Gallo, who's behind the control room today and making all this happen. She's out there. A couple of ground rules. I did mute everyone, but again, unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. There's also a chat session. If you look in the bottom of your screen, there should be a little chat bubble there. If you don't want to jump in, you're afraid to, not sure it's the right time to interrupt, you can type a question in the chat session, and then we'll monitor that and try to figure out a way to work it in. We will probably use breakout rooms, or we may at least use breakout rooms towards the end of the session. So at that point, you'll get an invitation to join a room and have a chance to discuss with a smaller group. I also want to let people know we are recording today's session, so don't do anything crazy, but you shouldn't really be on camera, I don't think. The camera should be focused on our speaker, so nothing to worry about too much there. Well, that's enough of me. We'll be back next Sunday for more Dr. Stewart, and then back again in December, January, February, but I'll tell you more about that later. Without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Ann Stewart. We're so delighted to have her back. So Dr. Stewart is one of the administrators at Princeton Theological Seminary. She's also taught at Emory University. She's taught the Bible as poetry. She's taught Hebrew in the Bible, other classes, and we're just thrilled to have her here. So thank you, Ann.
Great, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with all of you this morning. Thank you for having me. It's great through the miracle of modern technology we can gather in this way. So thank you for inviting me into your homes this morning, and I am delighted to welcome you into my home here in Princeton. I am going to share my screen in just a minute so that we are all looking at the same text together. That means I won't be able to see all of you, so I won't be able to tell if you are falling asleep or you walk away from the screen. So I'll just wait till the quiz at the end of the hour to figure out who was paying attention and who wasn't. But if you have questions as we move along, please do feel free to put them into the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And my new friend Steve is going to help me monitor the chat, and so we'll keep our conversation rolling through the hour. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see this? Thumbs up if you can see. Fantastic. Okay, great. As Steve mentioned, while I serve here in the administration at Princeton Seminary, my actual training and my first love is as an Old Testament scholar. And I work particularly on the wisdom tradition of the Old Testament and the Book of Proverbs, which I think is really one of the most relevant books of the Bible for our modern context today. So we're going to be talking about that over the next few weeks. So just by way of preview, what we're going to do today in our hour is give you an introduction to the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. And then we're going to focus specifically on the Book of Proverbs itself to learn a little bit more about it and its main themes. And then we'll have some conversation around that. And then next week, we're going to take up Proverbs more specifically and our contemporary context. What does Proverbs have to say to us in the midst of a pandemic? What does Proverbs have to say about some of these really pressing issues about community, about wise living, about knowledge? And we'll have some time for conversation about that. So here's where we're going. If this is not what you signed up for, this is a good time to exit our Zoom room. But otherwise, if you are with me on this adventure, we will continue forward. So before we dive into the biblical tradition, I want to start by thinking about the nature of wisdom in our own lives and in our culture. So I'd like to ask you to think about an example of wisdom. What is an example of wisdom? I'm going to give you about 30 seconds of quiet time to think about that. And then I'd like you to go to that chat feature and type in your example into the chat, okay? So what is an example of wisdom? When you hear wisdom, what do you think? And when you're ready, find that chat button at the bottom of the screen and type in what you're thinking. Oh, great. We've got a great saying so far. A stitch in time saves 9. Got an example, wisdom in political leaders who are calling for healing, for unity. What else? We've got some knowledge that is grounded, also looks to the well-being of the future. Got some more sane. With those of you without sin, cast the first stone. All that glitters is not gold. Got some further values, the ability to draw on experience, learning, and apply it to current situations. Got some examples of people, aging people who have observed life and come to greater understanding of that which is significant. Knowledge of the facts, ability to apply them appropriately. So these are some habits, some ways of being. Another saying, this too shall pass. I can tell this is a very wise group of people. You all ought to be teaching the class. All right, these are terrific. One of the things we might note about this is note the variety of things that we have here when you think about examples of wisdom. We've got some wisdom sayings, some values, some observations of daily experience, and also some people, some examples of leadership or examples of old souls, as we might say, who hold wisdom. So this is also how we might think about wisdom in the Old Testament, in the Bible and the ancient Near Eastern tradition. It's not just a set of dogmas or doctrines, but it's drawn from daily experience. It's embodied in particular people and characters, and also in particular sayings. All right, so we wanted to define wisdom. Wisdom in the Oxford English Dictionary is defined as the capacity of judging rightly in matters relating to life and conduct. So there's our dictionary definition. But of course, this raises questions about how does one judge rightly? Who is to decide what is wisdom? So to answer these very deep questions of the human condition, I went to the source of all wisdom, which is Google, right? I Googled it. And what came up when I Googled what is wisdom and how do you get it? Google can answer any question after all. Note what happened. There were 445 million results in less than half a second. No shortage of wisdom on the internet. And the first thing that came up, how to gain wisdom in 13 easy steps with pictures. How can you go wrong, right? Now, don't worry, I'm not going to read through to you all 445 million results from Google. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to you in your own time either. But I raised this at the beginning because I think that Google actually is one of the primary arbiters of wisdom, so to speak, in our modern society. So just think about your day yesterday, for example. How many of you looked up at least one thing on Google or another search engine? Just give me a thumbs up in your window. I'm seeing lots of hands, right? Or lots of thumbs, that is. Lots of people looking up things on Google. This is just part of our daily life at this point in time. Now, you might say, well, I was just seeking basic information. I was just looking up, how do I wear a mask? Or what's the weather tomorrow? And none of these are deep questions of the human condition. But what's interesting is that the thing is, Google is helping you to decide not just the answer to whatever question you're going to type in there, what is wisdom or something else, but it's trying to help you find the best answer to your question. It is making a determination about the order of things that you ought to see, right? I don't see all 445 million results on Google. I just see a certain number they show me on the first page. I imagine for most of you, you're just looking at the top one or two things that Google shows to you. You're probably not going through all of the pages to search through the entire answer. So Google, in some sense, is trying to help you judge rightly what is the best answer to your question. So how does it do that? It does that by certain algorithms. Google has an algorithm called PageRank that has a variety of factors that help to determine what they show towards the top of that list, which has to do, in some sense, with how much traffic various pages get. Also has to do with the financial incentive of paid advertisers to Google. This to determine what we see and when. So for example, you might notice at the top here that I can also have shopping for what is wisdom and how do I get it. And so the sources that it is showing me for wisdom, among them, these are the top 3 sources if I want to buy wisdom. Several books, including 7 laws you must honor to have uncommon success. Sounds like maybe that should be another topic for conversation. That's its own Sunday school lesson. I point to this because I think in many respects there is a vibrant conversation in our culture today, though it's not always explicit, about what is it that we value and who gets to determine what we value. And because so much of the information that we take in is mediated through Google and other kinds of technology, that in some ways influences what it is that we're seeing, what we're consuming, and there are values behind that, that it is worth being reflective about. And this actually is what the Book of Proverbs is about. But I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit. So what is wisdom? As we think about this for the purpose of our conversation today and thinking about the Bible specifically, you can think about this in 2 respects. It's a kind of literature in the Bible. And wisdom also is a way of looking at the world, a particular set of worldviews and values. We're going to look at each of these in turn. So wisdom literature in the Bible. In the Old Testament, 3 books in particular are often considered part of the wisdom tradition: Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. Some Psalms are also considered part of the wisdom tradition, those that seem to have wisdom themes related to them. You might think of Psalm 1, for example. Happy is the one who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. It has wisdom themes in it. What ties these books together, although they're very different in genre, they're a blend of poetry and prose and dialogue, but what ties them together are some common themes. So for example, character and instruction. These books are concerned with the formation of our character and with teaching. They're overtly about teaching. They are rooted in daily experience, in the observable phenomena of daily life. So for the wisdom tradition, they think of the whole world as a classroom. Daily experience is the subject of instruction. And in this respect, I think that this is one of the reasons that the wisdom literature is some of the most relevant literature to our time, especially in a period of time when there is declining rates of biblical literacy among the public. Wisdom literature is highly relatable, right? It's not like the texts that have burning bush, right? Or weird prophets with things that they experience. But wisdom literature comes from daily and observable life. These books are also concerned with God, humans, and the order of the world. They're concerned with how do we make sense of order in the world, and what is God's role in that? Each of these books have a slightly different take on it, and so there's a vibrant conversation amongst them about the nature of order in the world. Okay, wisdom is also a way of looking at the world. In addition to a set of texts, it's a way of viewing the world, and that's true for every culture. Every culture has a set of values that order and guide it. And sometimes there are competing values in culture for what should order and guide it. So every culture has wisdom traditions in it. We're going to take a look at a couple of examples. So one collection of wisdom sayings is Poor Richard's Almanac, a collection of wisdom from early America. Here is early America, that is. Here are a couple of sayings from Poor Richard's Almanac. Penny saved is a penny earned. Stitch in time saves 9. We've already heard that once today. Diligence is the mother of good luck. Early to bed, early to rise makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. This is my father's favorite saying. I heard this all the time when I was a kid. He that speaks much is much mistaken. So looking at this collection of sayings, what values do you see behind it? What are some of the values you see encoded in these sayings? I'm going to invite you just to unmute yourselves and shout out any values that you see behind here. What do you think?
Prudence.
Prudence, good. What else?
Hard work.
Hard work, excellent.
Listening to others.
Good, listening to others.
Humility.
Humility, good. Anything else? This is a great list, right? Prudence, diligence, humility. So let's take a look at another example from a different time and place. Here's a collection of sayings from ancient Mesopotamia. If I instruct him, he is only what I begot. If I polish him, he is only a blockhead. As they say, the early grain will flourish. How can we know? The late grain will flourish. How can we know? When fire consumes the one in front, the one behind doesn't ask, where's the one in front? And last year I ate garlic. This year I have heartburn. What values do you see here? And I'll invite you to unmute and shout it out.
Irony.
Irony, good, yes.
We have to be careful about correlations.
Okay, say a little bit more about that. In what respect?
Well, the fact that last year I ate garlic and this year I have heartburn, there's no correlation in that. It happened and something else happened. But you have to be careful about assumptions you're making.
Okay, good. What else do you see? If I instruct him, he's only what I begot. If I polish him, he is only a blockhead. What does that mean?
Isn't that kind of like if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime. You need to give them the tools, not just.
Yeah, so interesting, and that's a great example to put in conversation with them. So give a man the fish, he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime, right? So behind that is a fairly optimistic view about teaching, right? If you can instruct somebody, they will then have the tools that they need to flourish for a lifetime. Here, this one is a little more skeptical about the utility of teaching, right? If I instruct him, he's only what I begot. I might polish him up, but he's only a blockhead, right? Teaching can only do so much, but sometimes the innate gifts of a person are a limitation in that respect, right?
Yeah. And if polish to me means if you tell a person maybe how great they are and how wonderful, the person feels he doesn't need to listen to any instruction. I don't know if that's the meaning of polish, but it just sort of intimates that he does not need anything more.
Yeah, great. We're going to see this theme particularly in Proverbs about how critical discipline is to the teaching path. So keep that in mind for later. That's a great observation. And now let's look at a set of sayings from the Book of Proverbs. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, so that one may avoid the snares of death. Without counsel, plans go wrong, but with many advisors, they succeed. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked are stupid. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Okay, now with this selection, what are some values that you see here?
Education.
Education, great. Education is important. Why is it important?
So that you can become wise.
Okay, great. So it's not necessarily innate, right? It needs to be taught and learned. Great, very good. What other values do you see?
I see humility again. If you think you can do it all yourself, your plans are probably going to go wrong. But if you include others, teamwork, if you acknowledge that you don't know it all.
Yeah, excellent. Those are two really central things for the Book of Proverbs. Acknowledging you don't know it all. There are profound limitations on what humans know. And the humility to listen to other voices in the community as a large part of wisdom. Great. Anything else that you see?
I think it speaks to what parents are given, the responsibility that parents have in trying to instill all of this in very young lives so that they will continue to grow in the best way possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Marnie. And we're going to see this later as well, that the real responsibility that parents in particular have for teaching their children.
You know, a term that we use sometimes in school, especially with athletic teams, coachability, an openness and a willingness to accept the coaching of somebody that knows how to direct you in the right path.
Excellent. Yes, this is a major theme of Proverbs as well, right? They don't assume that everyone is equally coachable, but part of the task of teaching is to discern what the student needs and how to coach them appropriately to their own coachability. Yeah, great. All right, so we see when we compare each of these sets of sayings from different times and places that there are slightly different values. We might say there's some commonalities, some common threads among the 3 different collections that I showed you, but each have their own particular flavor and emphases, right? So as we turn specifically to the Book of Proverbs, which is a collection of sayings from ancient Israel, a couple of things about this book. First of all, how to find it. If you are looking for it in your Bible, you will find it after the Psalms and before the prophets, just tucked in there. So that's a good way to find it. If you have not read the Book of Proverbs or haven't read it recently, this is the homework that I will assign you before next week, is to go find it in your Bible. It's not necessarily a book that rewards reading from beginning to end, but because it is a set of collections of short sayings, it is a book that often rewards dipping in and out and finding a couple of sayings and letting them bump up against your daily experience. So I will encourage you to become familiar with the Book of Proverbs this week if you're not already. Proverbs has 31 chapters. It is a mix of short sayings, collections of short proverbial sayings, and long poems. The first 9 chapters of the book are a set of longer poems, beautiful poems that have particularly to do with a dialogue between a teacher, a parent, and a student, as well as two women, one wisdom embodied as a woman, and a foolish woman. We'll have a chance to talk about their conversation more next week. How many of you are familiar with Bill Bennon's The Book of Virtues? Anybody have seen this before? So this is a collection of moral stories in this case, but it is organized. If you look at the table of contents, it's organized by different sets of virtues: self-discipline, compassion, responsibility, etc. This is not the way that Proverbs is organized. Okay. Proverbs is not organized by theme or value, but instead is a collection of different sayings, which sometimes seem to have no rhyme or reason to the ways that they're organized together. If you look across the 31 chapters of Proverbs, you'll see they're organized by 8 different collections. The first collection, as I mentioned, chapters 1 through 9, are full of longer poems that have to do with desire and the search for wisdom. Again, we'll talk about that next time. And then chapters 10 forward are a set of collections that are shorter proverbial sayings. Again, often don't necessarily seem to be organized in any particular way. But that too, I think, is instructive about the kind of wisdom that it is and what its purpose is. So you can't look up in an index where are the sayings about folly, for example, or foolishness, and just go to those sections. But rather, you have to read this book with the context of your daily experience. And as you encounter the sayings as you read through the book, it's designed that you put them into conversation with what you are experiencing and what you are speaking in the world. Proverbs is not a book that is meant to be read just in the library or apart from what's happening in the world, but it really is a book that's meant to be taken out for a spin, if you will, in the midst of your daily life and experience. That's where the book comes alive and has meaning, when we put all of these proverbial sayings in the context of daily lived experience. In terms of the date of the book, Proverbs is a collection that likely grew over a very long period of time. The earliest parts of the book may date to as early as King Solomon in the 10th century. You'll notice that many of these collections are attributed to Solomon. Likely doesn't mean that Solomon wrote them, but rather that they were connected to the wisdom tradition around the royal court. That this was a location of wisdom teaching and associated with wisdom. It seems that the last layers of the book, which are likely the first part of the book, chapters 1 through 9, and the last poem of the book, chapter 31, the woman of substance, are probably the latest aspects of the book and may date to the Persian period or the Hellenistic period. So this is likely a book that developed over a long period of time, a set of collections that were added to. A couple of themes that we find in the Book of Proverbs. So it's not organized by theme. Here are some themes that we can be looking to as we encounter these different sayings. I'm going to give you the themes and then we'll go through each of them in more detail. A major theme of the book, of course, is teaching. These are books that are, this is a book that is about teaching. It's designed to teach and it gives instruction for living. Workplace advice is in the Book of Proverbs, specifically related to the court. So the workplace advice here is designed for those who are functioning in the royal court in some ways. And as I had mentioned earlier, the wisdom tradition is often connected to court setting. Order is a major theme in the book, how the world works and God's role in upholding order. And finally, discipline. Discipline is a major element of what it means to be wise and to become wise, which often requires hard choices between competing goods. So let's take up each of these in turn. First of all, teaching. Here are a couple of sayings that we'll see within the book. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, so that one may avoid the snares of death. Note that there are high stakes involved. This is not just wisdom as a nice idea or something that is helpful, but there is something at stake in wisdom. Like life and death are the stakes. Here's a saying from chapter 22. Train a child in the right way, and when old, they will not stray. This is the translation that we find in the NRSV, by the way. So does that seem pretty straightforward, what the advice is? A lot of people nod. Okay. Now, one of the things that is true about the Book of Proverbs, though is not often apparent in the English translation, is that these are this is effective literature in the sense that there are very short sayings, and the sayings are often much shorter in Hebrew because of the way that the language works than they are in English. Even the English translations are themselves an interpretation of the saying. So another way to translate this verse, which is a little more authentic to the way it is in Hebrew, is train a youth according to his way, and even when he grows old, he will not depart from it. What do you think that means? I'm going to invite you to unmute if you have an idea and just share with us what you think. Does it change how you read that line from the one before?
You let the child be his authentic self.
Okay, so teach him in a way that is true to who the child is, essentially, right? And then he won't depart from it when he grows old. Good. Other thoughts or other ways to read it?
It seems to say that there isn't just one right way, that there are multiple right ways.
Okay, great. So train a child in the way that's appropriate to him, you might say, right? And when he grows old, he won't depart from it. So you might have to train one child differently than another child because they're different people. Yeah.
I read it that if you don't train him, that he'll continue to do it his own way, and perhaps he'll never be trainable, or he won't continue to learn.
Okay, good, Jim. So train a child according to his way. That is, you just indulge him, you let him do whatever he wants, and then that's it for the rest of his life. You set him up well. Great. Any other ways to read it?
In education, there's an idea of different learning styles and that some students learn very different from others. It seems to kind of anticipate that. We have visual learners and kinetic learners. We have to teach students the way they will learn.
Okay, so again, more focused on the child, teach them the way that they will learn, and that will serve them well. Any other ways to read it? Any other thoughts? Sometimes you'll see in translations, train a youth according to his way with the capital H, his way. And even when he grows old, he will not depart from it. What are those translations getting at?
That actually was my first thought, but I wasn't sure since the his is not capitalized. At first I thought, in God's way, and even when he grows old, he will not depart from it. But I hear these other ways, which certainly have validity. But yeah, so you said it is sometimes capitalized.
Sometimes. So that reading would be train a child according to the way of God, right? And that will serve the child well for his life. So these are all great interpretations of this, just this very brief saying, but they're all very different. How do we know which one is the right one? I can't have you arm wrestle each other because you're all on Zoom. So how are we going to decide?
We invite someone that knows Hebrew to teach us.
Fortunately, I don't have the answers either, but note that note what happened here with just this very brief saying, which was not quite as cut and dry as we may have thought when we first saw the translation. But it has sparked for us, even right here, a sort of wisdom conversation, right? We heard lots of different ideas about the different ways people learn, how we might read that. We heard about attending to a child's own learning styles or their authentic self. We heard a little more skeptical interpretation of if we kind of take that to the extreme and indulge a child and teach them according to the way that they prefer, they might not depart from it when they grow older.
But no matter which one of those we take, we can dismiss the entire issue by dropping the phrase "in his way." What is undisputable is that one should teach rather than ignore the child for the child's own good.
Okay, very good. Yes, so teaching is central, right? And it's so complex that it requires a great deal of thought and conversation. So there is a way in which even the way that these sayings are written and they're structured, they're much deeper than we would think, and they actually provoke a sort of wisdom conversation. That the point of wisdom in many of these sayings is not simply to have a very black and white set of instructions that do this and don't do this, but rather they require putting them into context and conversation with others and with our own experience, right? And I heard some of that experience even behind some of the comments that were offered, right? Of Well, in education, they kind of talk about kinetic learning, other kinds of learning, right? Or maybe some of you have experienced trying to teach someone and indulging them in their own ways and it not working out very well. So this is part of the nature of how these sayings operate, that they invite and open up a set of wisdom conversation, but with teaching at their center. Okay, another theme is workplace advice, how to function in the court. So in chapter 16, we read, it's an abomination for kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness. There's a major theme within the Book of Proverbs that the king and leaders in a society cooperate with God in upholding the proper order of society, which has to do with righteousness and equity and justice. Here's another piece of advice. When you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you. Put a knife to your throat if you have a big appetite. Okay, so this one has to do not just with table manners and controlling portion control, as you might say, but also remember that in the ancient Near East, the host would often signal favor by the amount of food given to each guest. You may remember in the Joseph story in Genesis, for example, Joseph in Egypt shows his brother Benjamin favor by giving him a portion that is significantly larger than his brother's. So here, this advice is not simply about greed, but also about minding one's rank, right? Not looking at others' portions to see where they rank, but minding your rank. So again, this has to do with an interest in preserving order in the society and in the workplace in some sense. We see order as a major theme and God's role in order and how the world works. For example, in chapter 17, there's a saying, to acquit the guilty and convict the innocent. Both are an abomination to the Lord. So there's a sense in the Book of Proverbs that wisdom and God's order are behind the right ordering of society, right? Of the guilty being convicted, the innocent being acquitted. That the proper functioning of order is what God desires. Now, if any of you ever watched Seinfeld, you saw the episode where they have the bizarro world. There's Superman, you talk about the bizarro world, right? Where things are just upside down, they're topsy-turvy in another world. In some respects, the Book of Proverbs is counter to that, right? That the bizarro world is a world that is full of foolishness, right? That the interest of Proverbs is the right ordering of the world. Another saying, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but an accurate weight is his delight. Right? There's a sense that the world works because we can rely on accurate weights and measures. This is central to the functioning of society. And this is why God demands honesty from people. It's about the maintenance of order in the society. And then finally, when the tempest passes, the wicked are no more, but the righteous are established forever. So Proverbs does not have a sense that bad things never happen to good people. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. Sometimes bad things happen to bad people. But Proverbs has a sort of long-term view, right? That at the end of the day, the righteous, the wise, they will be preserved. They will prevail because they are rooted and grounded in a sense of wisdom and God's order. And in fact, the problem with the wicked or the foolish people is that they are not deeply rooted. And so ultimately they perish. Again, remember, Proverbs sets the pursuit of wisdom as a life and death kind of urgency. And then finally, a fourth theme that we see in Proverbs is discipline. Discipline as central to teaching and as central to developing wisdom. So a saying we've already seen once today: whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked are stupid. Note here both that it uses the language of emotion. Part of what Proverbs is trying to do is to appeal to and develop the emotional intelligence of the student in a way. It's not just having rational knowledge of right from wrong, but actually coming to love the things that lead to wisdom and to hate the things that take away from it. And that means loving discipline, because that is a means of becoming wiser still. So those who welcome discipline, who welcome instruction, these actually are the wise. Another saying from chapter 26, do not answer fools according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself. Again, fairly clear advice about what we're supposed to do, right? Now note that the very next verse in this collection says this: answer fools according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes. Isn't that a contradiction? What are we supposed to do? Any ideas? Should we answer fools or not answer fools according to their folly? Anybody have a thought?
Confrontation is necessary.
Okay, so you're going to lean towards answer fools according to their folly, where the danger is they will just persist in their foolishness. They won't be corrected.
Speaking the truth is critical.
All right, it's important to speak the truth, so to not deceive yourselves and not let others to persist in their self-deception.
It could not have been the orientation of the person that originally wrote this, but we think about in the New Testament where we're urged to be fools for Christ. And maybe it's, you have to risk being a fool to live in right relationship with God.
Okay, so sometimes there is a risk involved in what we choose to do. That's putting ourselves out there in the midst of the community.
Context matters, and there's judgment involved for what the situation is.
Okay, that's a really important point, James. So you're saying that I can't necessarily tell which one of these sayings I need to apply. It depends on the particular situation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. So as I was saying before, Proverbs is not designed as a book to be read in the library, cloistered away in your home. It's a book that is designed to be used and applied in the public spaces, and this is why wisdom is a very active faculty that takes development over a lifetime, because it requires the facility and the wherewithal and the interpretation to know in any particular situation which of these competing sayings do I need to apply. Both might be equally valid and full of wisdom, but the distinction comes in knowing which to apply in which circumstance. Right? You might think about this, any of you who are on Facebook or Twitter or any of these social media platforms that we see a lot of opinions that are spouted in the world. How do I know when I should make a comment on someone's post or refrain from doing so? Right? The answer is context and the application of which of these sayings to use. That in itself is wisdom. Different situations call for different actions. So where does that leave us? Again, I'm going to point us towards next time when I'd love to take up some of these themes in context of our contemporary culture. Because as I've said, I think that this has a lot to do with how we think about the application of some of these dynamics in our contemporary world, particularly at a time when there are so many voices and competing voices that are present to us really 24 hours a day. And that's often through the technology of our phones, of the things that, of the news media, things that bring to us all sorts of voices all day long. And part of our task is to discern among them which are helpful and which are harmful, which lead to wisdom and which lead to foolishness. So we're going to leave some of that conversation for next time of what is wisdom in our real world and how do we become wise. In our time remaining, in just a minute, I'm going to ask Sarah to break us into some smaller groups. And I'd like you in those groups to talk about two things. One, name one new thing that you learned today or something that you thought about in a new way. And second, one question that you have. It could be a question about something we've covered, or it could be a question that you have that we'll take up next time, a question that's provoked for you about the world. Okay, so we'll, in just a moment, we'll take about 5 minutes in these small breakout groups, and you're going to talk about two things. One thing you learned today or learned to see in a new way, and one question that you have. Okay, is that clear? Okay, I think we've all been magically teleported back. Great, thank you, Sarah, for facilitating that. Now that we can see each other's faces, any insights from your small groups, things that you learned, questions that you have?
For our group, it was clearly those last two verses. That was really pretty tricky for you to put those last two verses in right before we broke out. Those are the ones that are the conflict in our discussion, that, you know, how do we know when we have the wisdom to speak out and tell the whole room that, you know, here's what you need to know? And when should we keep our mouths shut?
Thanks, Maria. Those are, again, you know, why I think Proverbs is so incredibly relevant to our modern age, is that's the dynamic that we're all living in. And Proverbs often gets portrayed as a very simplistic book, a very black and white, do this and don't do that. But it is much more complex than that, and actually invites us to sit in this tension and develop the wisdom needed to navigate through. And I think we're all experiencing how difficult that is, particularly in these in this current age.
Our group kind of had the observation that Proverbs is something we've just completely ignored, that we've kind of taken a peek at it in the past and thought, oh, you know, there's not much here. It's kind of simplistic. And it takes a totally different type of reading discipline, because you have to stop and reflect after every sentence. So we were challenged to go back and give it a little bit of extra time and thought.
Great, I'm so pleased to hear that, Steve. I often think of myself as an evangelist for the Book of Proverbs, because it does often get pretty short shrift in the church. It occurs rarely, I think only once or twice in the lectionary, and so it's usually not preached in congregations, and yet has so much insight to share if we have the discipline to sit and wrestle with it. So I commend that to you in the coming week. Other questions or things that you learned? Anybody else learn anything?
Our group went back to the proverb about train your child in the way he should, you know, how we had some debate about about the what that proverb meant. And we continue to wrestle with that. And we just realized that there's so much more to Proverbs. And so I'm really excited that that's our assignment to go back and read the whole book, because I haven't looked at it in years, I have to say.
Okay, Julie, thanks for sharing that.
I wonder how you use them, not selfishly, because it seems like you can adapt them or interpret them for just that, your own, and they are for selfish means, and how you avoid that trap.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. That in itself is wisdom, right? And
I must be getting really old then, I guess.
But maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but the distinction between the wise and the fools, right? Are those, sometimes fools are not foolish in the sense that they are not intelligent, but that they are actually able to twist things for other meanings and in ways that don't promote the health of the community at the end of the day. So that's part of how also one must discern about the character of others. I saw someone in the Norman Dykstra screen who's probably not Norman trying to
Okay.
speak.
I guess that might be me. I think our group talked about, as so many groups did, about trying to discern when you should step in and when you should not. And that will probably mess it up a time or two. And then we just go back and keep trying to do it better. And maybe that's part of the discipline of gaining wisdom.
That's a really important insight, that doing it, reflecting on it, getting feedback about it is part of the constant cycle of acquiring more wisdom. For Proverbs, one never fully arrives at wisdom. You've never sort of made it or you're done. Even the wise person, even the sage, requires instruction and discipline and rebuke and constant seeking of wisdom. And for Proverbs, that's because of its general outlook about the order of the world, that wisdom ultimately belongs to God. And humans, while they can seek out wisdom and need to continue to seek out wisdom, ultimately need to remember that there's a limited capacity and we have to rely on God's insight. And so wisdom ultimately leads us closer to God.
Richard made the comment earlier about people being coachable. And I think that's my biggest takeaway is, are we willing to continue to learn, or do we just say, I know what I know? Hopefully we're coachable. So Richard, thank you for that insight.
Yes, that's part of the disposition of part of the key of a wise person is you're coachable. You're constantly coachable.
So all of us on this Zoom are coachable because we're here. So we're all very wise now.
Wise.
I think you brought a lot of wisdom to our conversation. So I'm grateful to you for your presence and participation in our conversation today. Next week, as I said, we'll continue to take up these themes and particularly try to put them in some deliberate conversation with things we're seeing in the world around us. And so your task for the week ahead is to dip into the Book of Proverbs, find it in your Bible, dust that book off. Just, you don't have to read the whole thing, but as you flip through it, as your eye kind of centers on various sayings, take them out for a trial run, as I like to say. Put them into the context of things that you are experiencing or things you're seeing in the world. And if you have a saying or two that strikes you as something that was particularly relevant or challenging, as you think about how to apply it in the context of your life and world, then write that down and bring it back to us next week so we can put some of these things in conversation together.
And I have a clarification question. Okay. Where would you recommend we start in this book this week?
That's a great question. Well, the thing about Proverbs, any book, you can start at the beginning. As I mentioned, the book is sort of organized, and the first 9 chapters are these longer poems and sayings. It's actually very beautiful poetry. There's a lot of resonance in the themes of the Song of Songs and the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. So I might recommend that you read those first 9 chapters. They're pretty easy to read. And then the rest of the book are these sayings of different collections of different sayings. And so you actually don't need to have a rhyme or reason as you look into it. I don't typically recommend you just sort of open your Bible and you put your finger down and do biblical interpretation that way. But in this case, I would invite you to just see where your eye lands. Take up a couple of sayings. Proverbs can be rather tedious if you try to read it verse for verse all the way through from beginning to end in one sitting. Actually, don't recommend that. But I do recommend, and maybe in the mornings this week, you just take a couple of things, take 4 or 5, let them rattle around in your brain and take them with you when you go about your work, and see at the end of the day which of those stuck or resonated or caused you to think again by the end of the day. So Proverbs invites play. Wisdom invites play. So play with these things this week and just see where it leads you. I am really grateful for your time today. I'm going to close us with prayer, and those of you who then want to depart to go to worship or other things you have to do today, you're welcome to do so. I'm also going to stay in the Zoom room. We'll leave the Zoom room open for a while, and if you'd like to have some further questions or want to have some further conversation, we will stay. But let's close with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Holy God, we give you thanks for your enduring presence in our lives. We pray that you would give us grace and knowledge, perseverance to pursue wisdom. Open our eyes so that we may see the world as you see it. Instruct us in the order that you would have us know. Help us to be faithful to your calling for each of us, and to your calling to help us bring wisdom to our community, to our family, to our friends. We thank you for the opportunity to gather, and we pray that you would continue to let us soak in the wisdom of your word. Help us to deepen our faith in you. Pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.